Hi, James. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, Ethan. Thanks. Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Well, it's great to speak to you also from Leeds like me. What was life like for you growing up in Leeds?
It was good, to be honest. I grew up in Headingley. For anyone who's never been to Leeds but might have seen the cricket, I always tell them if that shot when they would have panning across the pitch and you'd see those red brick terraces over the Kirkstall Lane end. That's the exact streets I grew up in. So it was fun. It was good fun. I wrote a book called Above Head Height, and I wrote a lot about playing in those streets, playing football in those streets, and it was pretty good until about 1979 when blokes started killing women where I lived and stuff, and then the miners' strike a bit later on from that. It was good for quite a long time.
So you worked at Sounds and NME before Loaded. Did you
Yeah,
enjoy working at these magazines?
yes. How I started was I was a freelancer. What it was when I'd left school in about 1984. I think I was 18. I'd done a year and a half at the sixth form, and I wasn't really able to concentrate or commit to doing the work. And I'd already been hitching around the country for a couple of years, selling my little fanzine. And I started, once I'd left school, I needed to get some cash. So I was selling my magazines, I was signing on. I was on a thing called the Enterprise Allowance Scheme that it took you off the dole figures, but it allowed you to earn. It was quite a good thing, really, in that respect. And I knew blokes and women all over the country doing their own fanzines who had record stores. They might put gigs on at pubs or in little venues. And there was this underground network, and I would travel all over. I would hitchhike to Sheffield, Hull, Manchester, Edinburgh, Newcastle. Even one time I went to Plymouth.
Really?
Yeah, and there I stayed at the guy who ended up running Heavenly Records, who signed the Manics and people like that. I stayed behind his sofa in a sleeping bag. He had a record stall and he put gigs on. And so I started sending reviews of those gigs in, and Sounds picked me up and started giving me features work quite early on. And then what happened was I was quite good at spotting bands that were getting places were good. So a couple of the pieces I wrote, the bands blew up before they printed them. So it meant that my pieces got a much bigger display because I was right about the timing. And it just picked up from there. And the editor really took me under his wing. You got to realize, Ethan. I mean, I looked about 13. I'd wear a t-shirt, just like I am today. I'd have a t-shirt and some shorts on. I often didn't have anywhere to stay in London, and it was before mobiles. So if you rang a mate and said, "Can I stay at yours?" and he wasn't answering his phone, or he and we used to have these things like look like tape recorders. They were answer machine boxes. You'd come in and there'd be a red light, and you'd press it, and it would say 6:45. Hi, it's James. Can I stay at yours tonight? And they'd come in, and by the end of the night, there'd be like six fucking messages. So sometimes I would go to gigs in London, hoping just to meet somebody who'd put me up. So that was sort of the start of it. And then the guy at Sounds really took me under his wing. He was called Tony Stewart, and I wrote something like 5 covers in 7 weeks. And at the end of that run, the enemy actually tapped me up and offered me a job, a full-time staff job. I couldn't believe it. I was almost a bit scared of it because it's what I'd always wanted. So at that point, I was 20 or 21, and I took the job. But Sounds was a great paper. It had been the paper that first covered punk in England, and it'd been the paper that kind of championed the new wave of British heavy metal, which wasn't my thing, but they were on the money with it. Things like Def Leppard and Iron Maiden and so on. And it was a good run. I interviewed some great people: Joe Strummer, Beastie Boys, younger bands as well, like Populi itself, Age of Chance. But I was also getting into hip hop and dance music because I used to go to this club in Manchester called the Man Alive Club. And there was some of the DJs would be like Dave Haslam is a well known DJ from Manchester. Dave used to play there. and he would be playing like he'd play something like the Gang of Four, and then he'd play Trouble Funk, and then he'd play a new band like maybe like that Petrol Emotion, then he'd play Mantronics. So he was mixing up all of this different type of. This was before Balearic beats, but he would think nothing of mixing up some really funky punk track with a modern indie track, and then something from Chicago or New York, and that changed my musical tastes a bit, you know. And then him and the Beastie Boys made rap even more palatable, not palatable, more gettable, because they came, you know, they came and toured in England with Run DMC, and Public Enemy came as well, and LL Cool J. So those Def Jam acts meant you could actually start to see these bands, because they sounded like punk bands in how abrasive and aggressive they were, and how immediate and loud and sort of boastful. So that meant I was writing about, I was reviewing like I made Public Enemy's the big album of the week in Sounds. I went to the boss and said, "This tape is amazing," because the first Public Enemy album is full of kind of like little clips and samples, and hip hop hadn't really massively been like that. And I said, "This is great. We should go massive with this." So that's why the NME came. They saw that I could write about legends like Joe Strummer, that I could get unique stories like when I went and doorstepped the Beastie Boys, but also that I knew about quite a broad array of new music. That was that. Then I got the job I'd always dreamt of when I knew I wouldn't play for Leeds.
What was the moment where you like knew you'd made your name, made a name for yourself?
There was a legendary writer called Nick Kent. In the 70s, Nick was rumoured to be joining the Rolling Stones before Ronnie Wood did. That was
Yep.
like how he was really close with Keith Richards, and he was kind of considered the best NME writer. This was before my time, but I kind of knew who he was. Sid Vicious had attacked him with a chain. So I knew of this guy. And then when I'd been on NME's writing, because I was sort of interested, I really like the concept of writing about music, you know, people who were good at it. I found people who could report on what it was like being on the road. So when I was about 13, I'd pick up an NME, there'd be a picture of the Beat or the Specials or the Undertones or somebody all piling out the back of a van on the side of a motorway. I just thought that looked great. Or there'd be a picture of the sound of the Clash in the dressing room or something like that. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be that close to the action, to the note, to the music, and so that was my motivation, to get even nearer to the music than in the crowd at the front. And so there was a guy who worked in the picture room at Lodi, the photo room, and he used to bring me old photocopies of articles that Nick Kent had written. When he'd find them, he'd have to go in to find out the provenance of a photograph, and he'd have all of these big piles of old newspapers. Every now and then he'd put a piece on. It was before my time, but when the Roses played at Ali Pali, so this guy was a legend. He wasn't somebody I'd revered as a reader, but he was somebody I knew. He was like the benchmark. I was in the bar at Ali Pali. I was the cocky little kid, because by the time I was 22, I was choosing the NME covers. My new boss, he, like the previous one, had kind of seen I had a lot of energy and passion and belief and front, and he'd given me my head. He made me the features editor, so I chose the covers. I was 22. That's younger than my son's just started his first proper job. He's 23. I was choosing whether I give Sinead O'Connor, I think, her first NME cover, When Nothing Compares to You, or, you know, bands like the Charlatans or the band that became the KLF. There were bands or arguing that we need to put the Mondays on the cover. That the boss thought they were drug dealers. He thought they were just giving the staff drugs. And I said, they may well be doing that, but they're also great bands. And so that was tremendous amount of influence. And I was more into new bands than old established legends. And I was at this bar and I just heard this voice saying, "Where's this James Brown everyone's talking about?" And I thought, who the fuck's that cheeky cunt? And I turned around and it was this guy, Nick Kent. who'd been. I recognised him for his photographs, and I said, "I'm here. Why?" And then he was like, "Oh, hi, I'm Nick." So that was the moment that I was suddenly aware that my writing or my reputation or what is it had gone beyond just the pages of the paper each week.
What is your favourite cover that you've done over the years, like on any magazine?
That I ever wrote or that I commissioned.
Either.
I've only got one on the wall at home. I've got two on the wall at home. I've got my first GQ cover, which had Paul Weller on, and it was just a great shot. I think a guy called Julian Broad took it, and he just looked great. He looked really. It was just a great shot. And I've got the cover of. I only edited 2 issues of the NME, and one was with Sean climbing on the E. Sean
Oh
Ryan.
yeah.
That was one. I edited that issue and I designed that cover. And the other one was we were supposed to be doing in spiral carpets, and the pictures were rubbish. To be fair to the guys, they were they were better live than they were in front of a camera. They had a great energy about them. They had things like marching bands, girls marching. They could make, and they'd done the coolest fuck t-shirts. They had a real energy and momentum about them. But these pictures were pretty poor of them on the road in America. And I just looked at it and I thought, I'm in charge this week. I don't want to put this on the cover. And then that Tuesday, the Clash smashed right into the. So this is Tuesday. The chart comes out. The Clash just smashed right into the top 20 out of nowhere because they had split up like 4 years before or something. And it was their music was on a. I think it was "Should I Stay or Should I Go" was on a Levi's advert.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I said, "We're not doing Inspiral Carpets. We're going to do a Clash cover." People were looking at me like I was mental, but one guy from Northern Ireland, he loved the Clash as well, Stuart Bailey. And I said, "Me and you'll do the cover." So I rang Mick. Joe wouldn't answer. Mick, Mick answered his phone. He didn't really want to. He had big audio dynamite, so he didn't really want to look backwards. But I talked him into it. So I went and interviewed him, and Stuart did a revisit of all the Clash best ever, the best records or something, the best songs. And then we did a vox pop of people just talking about what it meant with the Clash coming back. And for the cover, we put the famous picture Penny Smith took of Paul Simonon smashing his bass down. And Penny talked a little bit about that photograph. And I doubt anybody's watching this has got that issue. But if you look at it, it says Paul Simonon by Penny Smith. And then it says the day, the venue, and the time.
Really?
Because as he smashed it down, the head of the bass caught his watch and it broke his watch. And so, the watch stopped at something like 10:57. And as he came off, he just gave Penny his watch. He said, "That's fucked. You have that." So that's the one that I look at. That's in my living room on the top of a shelf. Because I would have loved to have had it the enemy.
Yeah.
Like that's what I wanted to do. I would have. That's really, really what I wanted to do. Even
You.
now, I look at music paper covers and I just think they're so fucking repetitive and lame.
What makes a good cover for you, then?
Well, great photograph. I mean, you've got to have a great photograph, great words. And by great photograph, I mean something with real energy, something that stops you in your tracks. So they're the two that I like. Obviously, I like that E because that was the only other one that I got to just decide out what the cover would look like. Um, I like the Strummer cover that I did for Load for Sounds. That was a
Yeah.
Peter Anderson shot because that got me my job. They had Neil Kinnock that week, and our sales did great. I had a Strummer cover. At NME, I wrote over 50 covers in 5 years. And I can't remember which is my favorite. I've got some really favorite NME covers that I didn't write.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, Chuck D was always brilliant to interview. He was a great interview. At Loaded, my favourite one was probably The Simpsons reading Loaded because
Yeah,
they drew that for us. But then I also like things like the last cover I did, which sold like 1/3 copies, had Harry Hill, the comedian. But at that point, he wasn't even presenting Saturday night TV, and he was riding a stuffed badger, and it had a bright red background, and it was so surreal and stupid. And I think the cover line said "Ride the Badger," and something like that. I like that. I like the Noel Gallagher one we did it was quite a nice portrait of him chest up, and I put a bread roll on the front, and it just said "and a roll with it." And the Gallaghers were good to do covers with. I'm trying to think what else looked good.
Did you do the drawing on Keegan's face?
Yeah, that was out of necessity.
Really?
Newcastle were thriving. They had a brilliant team. They had Albert, Shearer, Batty. They had a really great team, and they were 15 points ahead. It was that year when he blew it, when he bought a Asprilla and it kind of upended things, and then it was the would I. That everybody forgets this, but when he said "would I would love it," if they won the league, that was at Ellen Road.
Yeah, yeah.
Ferguson had just implied that Leeds had laid down and let Newcastle walk all over them, and that confronted Keegan's sense of fair play, and he was furious. But around that time, we had a guy go up and he wrote a fucking great positive piece about Keegan, and a really good photographer went. He was great, one of our guys, Steve Pike, and he came back and he said, "I've not really got a cover shot. Kevin wouldn't sit for a colour background, and he was in a really bad mood." And so we just had these pictures, and he looked a bit like a little fish. His eyes were all like bulgy, and he was looking off camera. And it wasn't it wasn't like now. If you want to get a picture now of Pep Guardiola, for instance, you can obviously go to Manchester City, but you could also go to whoever sponsors their shirts. And even if they don't let you shoot them, they've probably done a shoot to use in marketing, digital, or you might go to a sponsor that, I don't know, say he's sponsored by CP or somebody, and there weren't any decent photographs of footballers off the pitch. So we had it up on the screen. And then Steve, the art director, had a printout, and it just said "loaded," and then the picture. He said, "That's the best picture." And he would have these. They weren't like crayons, but they felt like crayons, and it was what he would write on the printouts to the messages to the printers to talk about the colours and things. So I just got one of these pens and drew glasses and wrote underneath, "I suppose you think that's funny." And then I walked away, and they said, "What?" I said, "Just use that."
Did it feel like it could do anything at that time, though, itself, kind of thing?
Yeah, because I sort of felt like them. In a way, we were supposed to be demystifying magazines. It felt like that you didn't have to do it. One of the best things anyone said was, "We do all the headlines and the introductions, the blurbs that other people do as a joke." When you've got a holding headline, somebody might just put something in as a joke, and they never had the nerve to do it. So that Keegan one was fun, and that got voted one of the 100 best ever magazine covers.
Did you ever hear out from him about it?
No, I don't ever even saw it. I mean, by then he was fucked, wasn't he? Ferguson's group were clawing back that 15 goal point difference.
When you went to Loaded, obviously everything about Loaded was like what you were a fan of: music, football. It was like a proper lads mag with adventures and stuff like that. Are you surprised that wasn't already happening before you did it?
Was I surprised that no one had done it?
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's a good question. No one's ever. It wasn't so much a surprise. It's just there was nothing to read, and more immediately there was nowhere for me to write. I'd left the NME where I could write about anything, and I was writing features for the Sunday Times. So actually, there were places for me to write. But for Sunday Times, I'd do like a big on the road piece for U2, or big interview with Lenny Kravitz, or wrote a piece about grunge, or wrote about the return of heroin deaths to rock and roll. But if I wanted to write about like just films me and my mates watched that weren't topical, which I did in the first issue of Loaded with Nail, or if I wanted to write about what my favourite biscuit was, just the sort of stuff that you talked about when you hang around with your friends, there was nowhere to put it. And so I was writing a few tiny bits for a magazine called Arena, which were basically about man at his worst. It was about blokes coming in drunk and pissing in usual places like the fridge or the girlfriend's parents' bed. You know, everybody's known somebody who's done that. Or people who had really messy cars, blokes who've treated their cars like their attic or their shed. I was writing things like that, and I wrote a piece about a new football boot which had blades. And in that piece, I also spoke to Adidas Craig Johnson about his new invention, which would become the Predator. And the picture was like that big. It's the size of a stamp. I reckon that was probably the first ever non-PR'd piece about what would become the Predator. So, you know, there was just an opportunity to do all the things that I was into. There was none of those magazines that existed ever had football in them. There might be one interview in 3 years with Gary Lineker. There were fashion magazines, and they were about style, GQ and Esquire and Arena. They would have 6 pages from the blokes who designed Tefal kitchenware products, but they wouldn't have a piece, say, about Steve Bull scoring 50 goals at Wolverhampton in League One. So they wouldn't have a piece about Peter Beagrie, the Man City striker, riding a motorbike into the hotel reception area on his pre-season tour. So all those things that we would talk about. What about that guy scoring 50 goals? And what about that nutter driving a motorbike into the hotel? That was the sort of stuff that you talk about with your friends. So it was very easy to fill it once you got the chance, you know, fill it with content.
It was very unique. Were you surprised at how quick it took off?
I sort of thought it would sell maybe. I thought if IPC got it into the shops, because there was a possibility that they were such a staid company that they might fuck it up. But I thought if they got it into the shops, it would sell. And then the art director who joined quite near, we went live, Steve, he said, let's do a fluorescent. So you've got your neon behind the curtain. We had a fluoro, and fluorescent ink wasn't used very much on magazine covers. And he did that orange Loaded. So that made it stand out. But in my mind, I thought at best it would sell 100,000 and at worst it would sell 10. And they sort of thought similar. They thought after 3 years it might have settled down at 30,000 copies a month. They thought it would be a kind of a niche. Well, we sold 70,000 after issue 2. I think the first one sold 63, the second one sold 70. And every issue bar one, in my 36 issues, the sales went up.
What was the point where you realised like this was a big thing that was happening?
When that mailbag came that I wrote about in Animal House.
Yeah, I've got the book here. It's a great book, by the way. Yeah.
3 weeks into issue 2, these 2 lads came in at the office. They were young. They were teenagers. Their faces had yet to be given the benefit of an adult complexion. You know, they lived off Doritos and probably cheap lager or whatever, or Lucozade or something. And they were really skinny young lads, and they had grey. You know, they had corporate polo shirts, and they were the boys that delivered the post. And they came in, these 2 boys came in, and they dropped these massive sacks. It was like a silvery grey sort of fabric with a bit of twine at the top, tying it up. And they were fucked because we were 4 stories up. And they said, thank God we found you. And we said, who are you? And he goes, we're the post room. We've been looking for you everywhere. Because the company didn't think it was good. We weren't even on the staff. Everybody was on a 3-month contract, like 12 weeks of pay. That's all they allocated. They didn't think it would work. So we didn't even have an official office address in the internal company scheme of the plan. And I'm like, what's this? He said, there's another one of them down there. And they went and got this other bag up. He said, it's your post. And we opened it up. So there were hundreds of letters, like really hundreds. The only thing I'd seen like it was when I was a kid, Blue Peter used to do an appeal at Christmas, and they'd say, can you send us your stamps or your milk bottle tops that have been used? And people would send loads of letters in with these stamps that have been used and stuff. And they would always be pictured surrounded by these sacks of mail. I can't believe it. I started opening them, a lot of them on postcards, and it was fan mail. It wasn't even discussing, as has happened many times over the years, the pros and cons of the start of Loaded. It was just fan mail like bands got, or footballers, pop stars, or TV stars. There were hundreds of letters. And they just mainly said, this is the best magazine ever. I've always wanted to read something like this. This is me. Keep going. Where can I subscribe?
Crazy.
That was pretty much the vibe. There was one bloke who complained about the swearing in it.
Oh, yeah, you tried writing back to him.
I just wrote back and told him to fuck off.
what so I know you had Sound, you started at Sounds and then NME, and then you had that little gap where it wasn't like your life was not going right, was it, with your mother, and then leaving NME, and then Loaded started.
Well, it was going right. It just wasn't going how anyone assumed. People assumed when I left NME that I was going to another job. And I wasn't. I was just sick of it. My mum had been ill, so I felt a bit down about that. I think I'd split up with my girlfriend for about 4 or 5 years. And I just started hanging around with these guys I knew, managing their band. And it was just a laugh. It was relaxing. NME was stressful. It was stressful in a good way, but I had to get a cover for every week that, you had to make sure, I had to do a lot of phone calls, make sure we could get like Morrissey or Banana Armour or, whoever it was, the Pixies, the Cure, Public Enemy, it was a lot of calling, and it was a great job. Enemy was my favorite job. And then I'd sort of lost, I wanted to be the boss and they didn't even let me interview for it. So I'd lost enthusiasm. So I wrote a few covers. I wrote a Primal Scream cover around Screamadelica. I wrote a Manic's first cover. I wrote a Pet Shop Boys cover when they were on a brilliant tour. And that's it. Then I quit. And that's when I started writing for the Sunday Times, hanging out with this band. But the sort of sense of fun and relaxation that I had, it was, in a way, it was quite good that it wasn't successful because there was no pressure. You just get in a van at about 3:00, drive to another part of the country, they'd make you tea, give you free alcohol, and if you're lucky, you'd get a snog. And in the midst of all that, the band would show off. And then we'd come home, and it was a great night out, and you do that 3 or 4 nights a week. And then later, when the band kind of exploded, I kind of thought, how can I have this lifestyle? And then Alan rang me up and asked me if I wanted to be the editor of the NME. And out of those interviews, he then said, when he realised they weren't going to make me the editor of the NME, they said, we want you to try and do your own magazines. It sounds great, doesn't it? But it was a long time ago.
We've Loaded. Was it just like, so obviously the story behind it is it was mental in the office, like 24/7 carnage, and was it really like that?
Yeah, it was worse.
What was a typical day like then at Loaded?
There were people freebasing heroin in the women's toilets. It was much worse. There was a lot of stuff we couldn't write about. The main thing was the guys were really funny. The atmosphere at NME had been really funny and sort of one-upmanship, but that's not typical of the media. You could go into a garage in Meanwood, or you could go into a printers in Swansea, or you could go into all sorts of offices all over the country. There'd be people making each other laugh and taking the piss. But that's all I'd known. That's what NME was like. That's what Loaded was like. I try to find people with real character. And that was the main thing. It was just really, really, really funny every day. And quite often, if you got into a row or a discussion about something, I realized if these three are having a row about this, we should put it in the mag. Maybe other people have the same strong feelings. I can remember being in a pub once and this young writer talking about who was hardest, Chuck Norris or Van Damme. It's that sort of stuff, that it would just put in the stuff that you wrote about in. It would never felt like work.
No,
Because because it was really good fun. If somebody enjoyed reading the article, maybe one of the writers had written something really funny about a story that they'd gone on. We'd already read that. We'd already been laughing at it I'd get the copy in, I would read it, and then we would turn it into an article. So then the sub editors would have to read it, and then the design team would have to read it. So everybody was just laughing reading these articles. And it felt great. It was a really nice place to work. There was people worked hard, and there was a lot of fun playing out, as well. But I think, as I said in the book, the subs team were great. They were really good, and it was relatively quiet room where they actually edited the copy. Everything would be read properly. We only got sued about 2 or 3 times, which, given what we were writing about, could have been 2 or 3 times an issue. And nobody made any money out of it but the company. So that was a bit disappointing. But and I suppose if my head was a little bit clearer, there might have been other things that we could have done. I looked at one issue recently near the end when I left, and I didn't think it looked good. And I'd never thought that before. We were having to go all these awards evenings.
what was it?
Which was great, getting the awards, but the magazine was getting bigger and bigger and bigger physically. They were selling more and more and more ads. Every time they sold an ad, say they sold a single page ad, and it was surplus to what we already have, you couldn't go up one page. You had to print 4 pages because the sheets were like, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you had to go up in 4s. So the mags just by the time I left, the issues were like over 300 pages, over double what we'd started with 36 issues before. And some of us needed a rest. I definitely needed a rest. Some of us were full blown into drug addiction, which was like exhausting, and alcoholism, exhausting.
With how much of that for you was that it was the dumb thing, and like it was like a 24/7 party, and how much was like?
But the thing is, that is what was going on in the country.
Yeah,
All over the country, every week we went out. I just had a mate came around here before we started this, and he said, "Oh, I thought you'd have mentioned our trip to Ibiza." And he said, "That was you at your lowest." And I said, "That happened every month." And he did. It did. I said, "By the way, that happened 3 or 4 times every month, because if I was in Ibiza with Rowan and Reese, Martin Deason might have been in New Orleans with Zed Nelson, hanging out with the corrupt police force, or Tim might have been in going off somewhere, doing something somewhere else. There was like 4 or 5 groups of writers and photographers having a brilliant time all the time."
The thing with Loaded at that time as well is, like you mentioned, like Britain was at a good time as well, like with TV and films, music, football, fashion, and like even like stand-up comedians were seen as rock stars and stuff. Do you
Yeah.
miss that, like how personalities and that these days? Do you think we miss that?
No, I think that still goes on.
Yeah, yeah.
I know some boys and girls who are comedians, and they're massive. Like Vittorio and his crowd. Alex Haddow, who she does a DJing thing and she does a comedian. There's a generation of comedians. I only know 2 or 3 of them, but they do these massive fucking gigs. They've got like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people on Instagram. But what you don't see them on is, you don't see them on "Have I Got News for You?" or that fucking program where they used to ad lib and do the silly acting around. You know, you don't see, they're in their own world. You know, like if you go back to when rave was exploding and people were having raves, illegal raves, you wouldn't see the people on top of the pops. You know,
No, no.
no, you would just the people were doing their own thing. So I think particularly with comedy, it's massive. I mean, the entrant point is much easier. It's much easier than ever to. I mean, you're interviewing me. You're going to put it online. You've got a chat show basically.
Yeah,
If I, you know, if how old are you?
24.
Okay, if a 24-year-old wanted a chat show in 1994, he'd have to he'd have to be famous for a start, and then he'd have to present it to somebody at Channel 4 or ITV or BBC, and they'd laugh him out of the room. So the opportunities to get in are much better. There's far more personalities now. There's far more content. There's far more. I mean, how often do you watch a reel and you think, oh, that music's good, and you click on it, and then you get the artist's name, and I assume as somebody who's not close to music, this person will have had 4 albums and are really big, and they've got 5,000 followers. You
Yeah,
know, there's like people who are really talented. The challenge is because anybody can get a platform now, whether it's on YouTube or Instagram or TikTok or whatever, you've got to be really good.
yeah. There's that much there. You've got to stand out. Yeah,
People,
yeah,
people vote with their eyes and their fingers. You know, the keyboards, they're like, so it's that in a way it's easier than ever to get going, but it's probably harder than ever to get noticed because there's
yeah.
millions of people doing the same things.
If you, if social media was around in the 90s and stuff, would you have done loaded on like YouTube as like a vlog thing? Do you think?
We used to film stuff and we didn't have anywhere to put it.
What was some of the stuff you'd film?
When they made that documentary, they were desperately trying to find films. Fortunately, one of the guys who did quite a lot of filming, he died very tragic death of sort of lifestyle and illness. He had a mixture. He had a very bad drug problem and he had a very bad illness. He got cancer or something like that. And he'd sold everything. He'd lost everything when he was using it. He ended up on the streets. But he had footage of us spending a week in a cave. And he had footage of a great party that I co-hosted with Paul Smith in Nottingham, where there were loads of fucking footballers and celebrities and stuff there. So we were, and then another guy, Chris, he won a video camera at a PR event, and we took it to New York. He couldn't find the footage because it's not digital.
Yeah,
You couldn't put it anywhere. You know, somewhere on YouTube, there's an interview I did with Mick Jones about his original Rock and Roll Public Library. Well, it'll still be on YouTube. Do you know what I mean? But in those days, if you filmed 7 idiots trying to sleep in a cave on an island, trying to survive, I don't even know where that is. It might be in a junk shop. It might be in somebody's cupboard. So we were filming everything, and we didn't. Just before I left, which I remember putting in, I remember Mike Carvin, who was the number 2 on the internet. He said, "Why don't we just blow up a car and film it?" I thought he was nuts. I said, "What for?" And he said, "It'll look great." That's like literally about the last thing I remember from editing Loaded. But what he just described was jackass.
yeah, yeah,
And there were lots of things that came as the media changed. What are those things? They don't have them anymore. Where people just flash mobs. I wanted to do flash mobs, but they weren't called flash mobs. I said, why don't we get all the readers just to walk down Oxford Street, like get about 500 at one end and 500 at the other, and just stop the traffic and get them to meet at Oxford Circus. You know, just talking about stupid things like that. I filmed Roland Riveron when he pretended to be Santa Claus at Dalston Shopping Centre, and he showed up with a real donkey that we'd hired. But I got no idea where that footage is. So we were generating stuff that we didn't have anywhere to put. Because at that point, the internet, which we had a website very early on, but the screen would load up
yeah, yeah.
and I'd come up like that, you know, all these crazy noises coming through the feed, and it would slowly just load up. And like the only sort of remember we had little headshots of women, and you had to vote who you liked most. There wasn't even any flesh or any all the stuff that we were accused of doing all the time. It was very naive and simple. But
You,
we didn't have any opportunity to do the stuff that people put on TikTok now or on YouTube.
you showed
We'd
all
have
that.
loved it.
It'd be good to see all that footage you mentioned there.
I told my kids, I said, if we'd had social media when I did Loaded, I'd have had over 1 million followers.
Yeah,
And they're
yeah.
like, yeah, I said, no doubt about it. We had over 1 million people reading it every month. All the celebrities that we met and wanted to be in the mag and were in the mag, it's been endless.
When you explain it to your sons, do they get how big you and the magazine were at that time?
But my eldest, he's 23. He told me one day, he came home and he said, we don't have the trappings of we don't have a flash stuff or anything like. I haven't got a watch or a big car. I'm pretty comfortable in my life, but I don't have a blingy lifestyle. So he came home once and he said, "We saw your magazine today in English or in media studies or something at secondary school. Kylie Minogue in her pants." He said, "Me and Finn, that was his mate, we're looking at it. We got told off." And it was like, I said, she was actually a swimwear issue. She wasn't in her pants. She was in a swimming bikini. And then he said he started getting slagged off by a girl whose dad worked for The Guardian. And I was a sexist or something. But then the little one, he's 11. And my girlfriend said at weekend, you've got to be really careful what you talk to him about because he's starting to take notice and interest in your past. And like, he couldn't sleep one night when my book came out. And his mum said, I don't live with his mum anymore, but his mum said, I'm really struggling to get him to sleep. I said, why don't you read him my book? And I said, just start on the first page. It's easy. There's nothing bad in it. So she was reading it. And then the next day she called me. She said, the bottom of the second page says, Patrick literally asked me, how did you sell so many magazines, taking so many drugs? This is, she's not knowing what she's reading. She's just reading it out to get him to sleep. This is Daddy's book. So this is when he would be about 8 or something on. Daddy took drugs. So I mean, I had to take some of the stuff out, so I didn't want the kids to see a lot of the stuff.
What, like the sex, drugs, rock and roll, lifestyle stuff?
Look, yeah. I mean, what I said earlier about people using certain Class A drugs at work, there was a lot of stuff that we didn't put in the magazine. But I mean, there's stuff you can do as a 28-year-old that you don't want your 13-year-old or your 8-year-old kid to know about. I mean, I doubt my eldest has even read my book. I think he's embarrassed. He said to me once, "What do you think it's like for me?" I said, "I mean," he says, "everyone just says I'm your son. They never just say I'm me." And fair play to him. He's just got a really good job. Really, really good job. He got through 5 interviews.
Really?
And he's got a really good job in the media, in video editing for somebody. Really well-known guy. And he did that all on himself. It was amazing. If I ever said to him, give this guy a call, they might be looking for some, he wouldn't do it.
That's a good thing that he's not living off your name, isn't it? That he's doing his own thing.
Yeah, yeah, but I'm glad he got a job when he did because, you need to get on in life, don't you?
Yeah, yeah.
He doesn't need me saying, when I was 23, I was putting Shane McGowan, Nick Cave and Mark Smith on the cover. What are you doing? I mean, now he's got a great job. It's a brilliant, I'm not going to say what it is because it's embarrassing, but a great job, a really good job working for a really like a top guy. Even I'd heard of him, and young entrepreneur. And so I don't know, really. The youngest is into fashion. He's 11. His world is vintage.
You spoke there though about with your son with the Kylie Minogue in her underwear, but it was a bikini and stuff. That kind of after you'd left, it kind of became more prevalent with the women in it, magazines and stuff. But do you think
Yeah,
that overshadows loaded the sexy type?
totally. One of the, I mean, I haven't watched that documentary, but I play football still, and I had a few guys who were probably in their early 30s, and they wanted to talk about it. And I said, I'm not that bothered. And they said, yeah, but what's good is we didn't know Loaded was like that. All we know is that it had babes on the cover. And I had to say, he said, now we know that you had Gaza and Noel Gallagher and Martin Clue. I mean, people they wouldn't even know, but people they do know, like the Gallaghers and so on. They'd be like, so that had got forgotten about. I mean, we won every award going. It was like the toast of publishing. We were generating wealth for news agents. We were like making jobs in printing. IPC launched loads more magazines off the back of the success of Loaded. Rival companies launched magazines to copy it, and it was seen as a really good thing. And the Guardian didn't like it because we said we fancied women. But if you go through the magazines that I edited, there's a lot of enthusiasm for women, but there's nothing derogatory about them. For every spread will be an amazing looking kind of model looking hot. You'll turn the pages and there'll be an interview with some like Carolina Hearn, and she'll be dressed like you. Well, not like you, but they'll have clothes on, or
Yeah,
there'll be an interview with an American actress, and she'll just be dressed like we are. So it wasn't like every single woman that was in the magazine was in her pants.
yeah,
And I know that. And that's what's been frustrating, is to see the way it's being changed. So that's the one thing. I don't know if they put it in, but I held up a poster of most of my covers.
yeah. They did, yeah, and there
And
were
it was
no three on it,
it
was
was
there?
it was like Will Carlin and Judge Dredd and Homer Simpson and Gary Oldman, and it was, I think there was like 5 or 6 covers with women on the front. It annoyed me for years,
Yeah,
because when I first left, I wanted to separate and say, oh, I'm doing something different now. So I didn't want to fight its battles for it. And then as soon as I left, they changed it. And they wanted to make sure that they got the extra sales that FHM were moving towards with the babes on the cover. And then after I left, I mean, I think maybe I've seen 3 copies of Loaded since 1997. There was a period about 12 years ago when they were trying to get back to sort of what we'd done originally. I forget the name of the guy. I think he was called Aaron or something. He was editing it, and the covers were sort of trying to get towards a traditional men's mag type of thing, with people like Noel on the cover, or whoever. And that period looked. I remember looking at those covers, thinking that's kind of like what looks a bit more like an older Loaded would have been if I was still there.
yeah, yeah.
It is a pity that there isn't a men's magazine market now. But
Did,
you know what it's like. Where did you look at all those pictures of the Leeds fans celebrating? On your phone,
yeah, yeah,
or like my son Billy, if he wants to buy some trainers or a T-shirt, he doesn't get a magazine. He looks at his phone. Whereas I still think some women's women's publishing was much more sophisticated in terms of, I don't mean the content, but in terms of the spread of the market. When I started Loaded, there was about 4 magazines that were lifestyle magazines aimed at men, but there were probably 34 aimed at women. And one of them would be for 15-year-old girls, 17-year-old girls, 21-year-old girls. And there were these, you'd go from, I don't know, more to sugar to, I don't know, just 17 to Elle to Marie Claire to Vogue to Woman's Realm and Good Housekeeping. It was like, oh, you could have a whole lifestyle in print, and that didn't exist for men. So the women's sector is still there. And they also later had really, to talk to you a bit about publishing, but they also had, they had really great launches. Like Grazia was a brilliant magazine, really, really stylish, different thing, weekly, looking great. There wasn't gossip orientated, and the men's sector never had that. It kind of was just that. It was like a nuclear bomb going off for about 8 or 9 years, and then it just went into decline as it attracted lesser talented people, and as the readers went to the phones. It wasn't the internet. Everybody thought the internet was going to fuck magazines up. It was phones and social. It
yeah.
wasn't. I mean, websites. Saw a headline the other week. Websites are dying.
Really?
Yeah, because everybody goes on YouTube or TikTok.
And
It's social now. It's social and phones, and it has been for a long time.
do you
When did
think?
you ask? Well, I mean, how many times you go on a website and you realise it's not been updated for 12 years? I,
Yeah,
I'm trying to find a film, an Italian film about Subbuteo, the little old 1970s footballers, and the website looks like. I reckon that. I mean, I don't think it's been looked at for 12 years, so I'm not sure about whether to send them the money for the film because I don't think they'll even get the notification.
yeah. I know what you mean. There's a lot of websites like that. Now you've mentioned it, where you
Yeah,
do one and it's just all, and it's got the date on it still. Like,
yeah.
we were last updated and stuff.
Or they'll be like, it'll say contact to us and it'll be some form of communication that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, like fax. It'll say fax and
Yeah.
that. What? Does it do your head in as well when, like, I've got nothing against David Baddiel, but on that documentary he was saying, "Oh, that photo with that woman, and you can see my face." But do your head in when people who were part of that magazine or featured in it then start slagging it off years later?
Is that what he was doing?
He said something like he was saying, "Yeah, when the lad culture, you grow out of it and stuff." But then he went, "Who was the woman on it? I can't remember who it was."
She was a model.
Yeah, and he said he was pulling a face. He was
I
uncomfortable.
was at that photo shoot. They fucking loved it. They couldn't believe it when she emerged in that referee's costume. They couldn't believe it. Neither of them had ever been near a woman who looked like that.
That's what I mean. So you can tell when people are like lying that they didn't, that they weren't part of it. They try and
I,
bring it.
I see Badil every week. He plays football. I play football in his game.
Really?
I can leave him on the floor.
That's what he
His,
said.
his son's a good player now. He's got stronger.
Really?
Yeah, but I don't really care what people say because they're talking about their own lives. Um, I haven't even watched it. Like I say, I'm not bothered. It's so long ago.
Did you not like doing it? Because at the end you can tell you're a bit pissed off with doing it.
Well, they made up that I'd stormed off down the beach. That's where I am now, and I hadn't. I said, let's have a break, and I went and sat on the beach, and I thought, I'm done now. I've said enough. And they came and said, can we take some pictures of you wandering off? I was like, yeah, okay, but I didn't know they were going to make it look like I was forlornly. I don't know if that's what they did, but it just got it just got tedious. The producer, the director was obsessed with focusing on girls' tits. Maybe she's into that. I don't know, but they were just. It was just relentless.
He did go down that route. That's all it was really based on. It wasn't based on all the other stuff he did. It was just like you said, the sex.
Exactly. You could have spent as much time talking about how we were influential in changing the way footballers presented themselves. You
Yeah,
know,
and he started a lot of careers and kicked like revived a lot of careers as well. They could have gone on that. No, like I said with Nail and I, that got re-released through
there was
talk
so
about.
much, there was loads of it. We had the first ever interview with Tiger Woods.
Yeah, yeah.
He was in the shower when Tim rang up. He said his dad said he's just going to school. He's in the shower. He'll call you after school. There was like loads of stuff that we did. When you go to America over the years, I've met guys who've worked on magazines like Vogue and Vanity Fair, senior editors of really the most prestigious magazines and the most admired magazines in the world. They go fucking bonkers for it. They said,
Really?
we got loaded. We couldn't believe it. It's like, this was like our era's Hunter Thompson sort of energy. But in England, it's sniffy, So I don't care. The readers loved it,
Yeah,
I
that's what
still, I get off. I mean, guys still offer to buy me drinks because they loved it. Unfortunately, I don't drink anymore, so their money's safe. But that was good enough at the time. We got all the awards, and the readers loved it. You go to a nightclub, and you didn't have to buy your own drugs or drink.
was that an exciting time as well with cultures coming together? Like you were there when Liam Gallagher and Gaza, two of the biggest stars at that time, when he sprayed him with the fire extinguisher.
Yeah, that was a great story. But I've seen Gaza recently talking about that, and Liam. I've seen both of them tell their versions of that, and they're both totally wrong. I mean, Gaza's not even in the right place where he's saying it's happened. But I was sober.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I was sober. I was Liam
When
and
you
I.
picking your kid up or something.
Yeah, but that was like years later. That was after loaded. I think I said in the book the most typically, archetypically loaded afternoon I ever had was with Liam and Gaza. And then I was interviewing Liam and Noel for a music magazine about their best of hits or something like that. And I finished with Liam. He said, I didn't really know Liam. I'd met him a couple of times briefly. They came at my birthday party about a year into Loaded. And then Noel had met a couple of times. And Noel and I possibly crossed paths when he was in Manchester. Because I lived in Manchester a little bit, but before I went to the enemy. And I rang, my mate just messaged me and he said, I'm with Gaza. He's getting into a right state. I'm not sure what to do. And I said, I'm with Liam. Why don't I come and meet you? So he was interviewing Gaza, and Gaza was supposed to be off the booze, but he was drinking Zambucas and he was getting really and then we got there. The stories Gaza told were insane. And in fact, my next book, I might ask the lawyers if I can print those stories because maybe he's mentioned them. But they involved him all sorts of crazy things that he was talking about. But the best bit was, I mean, we were all just curious to see what Gaza was like. He wanted Liam to sing. First of all, I had to vouch for Liam because he was in the quite well-known members club called the Groucho Club. Dan was interviewing Gaza for Squire or somebody at the Groucho Club. And last time Liam had been in there, he'd thrown some snooker balls around. It was in all the papers and he'd been banned. And that was a few years before. And they looked at me and they went, I said, it's okay, he's sober, it's lunchtime. It was. And they said, it's on your head. If you're bringing him in, I said, it'll be fine. We're just going up to meet my mate upstairs. He's not even been drinking. So we went upstairs. Gaza wanted Liam to sing, and it was starting to annoy Liam. And Gaza was going, sing us a song, sing us definitely, whatever. Sing Wonderwall, sing it. And Liam was going, I don't tell you to get a football out and do some headers. And eventually I knew that Liam really, because Liam's kids were the same age as mine. I knew that he had a young kid. And I started singing the SpongeBob. I went, who lives in a pineapple under the sea? And Liam just woke up and he went, SpongeBob SquarePants. And Liam just went into the whole SpongeBob SquarePants soundtrack, the theme tune. And Gaza was happy then. And then we got up to go. And we went off down the stairs because it was like 2:30, 2:45, and the kids were coming out of the primary. We both had to go our separate ways to get our children. And he said, hang on a minute. And I'm just on the turn in the stairs coming up from the upper floor. And he said, hang on a minute. And he went back. And I just heard I heard Gaz's voice going, oh, no, no. And then this almighty whooshing sound like, and all these people going, oh, Liam, no, no. And I looked in and he's just fucking fired the extinguisher over Gaza. And I set off down the stairs. I thought, oh, Jesus Christ. That cost me 180 quid. I had to pay. The Groucho Club wrote to me and said, you've got to pay for that fire extinguisher. And he's telling me he's barred again. and so I'm halfway out the door, down the steps, and he comes running down. And then we sort of ran out like two little kids. We ran round and stopped running in the next street. And that was it. That was the last time I saw Liam Gallagher, I think. And he was quite interested in. There's a theme park called Diggerland, which was built up off the back of Bob the Builder being popular. And it's a guy from Rochester in Kent. And kids just go there and they sit in fucking JCBs. And I was telling Liam about that. And as we left, he said, let's go to Diggerland. And that's it. I've never seen him. He wouldn't know me from Adam. But that was a great day. But like I said, I've seen Gaza talking about that, and he's invented all of this stuff. And I think he thinks it happened in Loch Lomond or somewhere else. And then I saw Liam talking a little bit about it. But what I wrote in the book is exactly what happened because I was totally sober.
That's one of those things you never forget either, is it?
After that, I called the lady that Dan was with, or maybe it was even when I was there, and I said, I've got a really good rehab counsellor. She said, "Oh, that might be really helpful, thanks." Because Gaza was, I mean, it's an unenviable situation to be an everyday addict, but everybody wants to buy you a drink, you know.
Did you get
It's
that
like,
a lot when you were coming off at drink?
not as much as Gaza will. Gaza's the biggest football hero until David Beckham. Also, Gaza was the first guy we'd had like that since the 1970s,
Yeah,
since the
like
mid.
since George Best or somebody.
Yeah, but I mean, there were all players like Stan Bowles who were kind of flamboyant players and lived the life off. And then there was the McAvenny and McAvenny at West Ham and Charlie Nicholas, but they didn't really have Gaza's charisma or ability. They were good players, but they were Gaza was a fucking superstar. And the hope that he gave us as I can remember just before 1990, England played a friendly, I think it was, and Gaza, Steve Bull, and John Barnes combined for 3 goals, and I think we beat Czechoslovakia. I was watching it in the house in the squat I lived in Peckham in 1990. I was on the NME. I remember thinking, "Fucking hell! I'd never seen England play like that. I should try and look that game up," because I remember sitting watching that, thinking, "Fucking hell, we're different." England were quite a boring team in the 80s. They had Beardsley and Waddle and Barnes and Lineker. That was good, but often the ball was passing square a lot, unless Waddle got down the line or Beardsley went through and laid it off. But they were like, it was a different directness. So Gaza was huge. Gaza was much, much bigger than anyone, perhaps, who don't remember at the time. He was a phenomenon. And now we live in the era when football is far more media savvy.
Yeah.
And we see footballers, the moment Jude Bellingham goes to, becomes an England star, he's celebrated and he'll have all his deals and his sponsorship and he'll have all this money and all these media managers and marketing people. They're all onto them and they know how to shape them and present them. But as we said, we wanted to put Eric Cantona on the cover of issue 1 of Loaded and we couldn't find a decent photo of him. Whereas now, if you try to say you wanted to put Jude Bellingham on the cover of a magazine, there'll be some great shots of him.
Yeah, yeah.
He either will have done some fashion shots for a brand or for a fashion magazine, or he'll have just done some nice headshots for his sportswear brand or his, whoever gives him his boots or the club, the kit or England. Or it's piss easy now, but it wasn't possible in those days.
You worked your way to the top, but as a lad from like Headingley in Leeds, well, I know you're originally from London, but from a lad from Leeds, and then you mix with all these A-list stars around the world and stuff. Did you ever feel that you fitted in, or did you always feel on the edge, or how did you feel at that time?
No, I totally felt like I fitted in.
Did you? Did you feel like?
Well, the thing is, when I was on the NME, I thought I was it anyway. I was it. I was a mouthy little kid who chose who got to go on the cover or not. And I was often right about the bands that I would choose. The Mondays made it. The Charlatans made it. But then I would be interviewing people, but there weren't many people like Mick Jones or Chuck D or Marquis Smith or Morrissey. There weren't that many. If you go to the younger generation of bands, there weren't many people like Sean, who was a great talker. So I started getting a tiny bit uninspired, If you interviewed Neil Tennant, he was a brilliant interview. Richie Manick and Nicky Wire were great interviews. James Dean Bradfield, those guys were great at talking, but there weren't that many of them. And I kind of felt like I was outgrowing a bit. I was losing my curiosity.
Yeah.
And then when Loaded was a hit, within weeks of when the first issue sold like over 60,000 copies, twice as many as it was supposed to sell, and then by issue 3 it had broken even. People started to realize this thing's fucking huge. The Telegraph, Newsweek, the Times, Sun, the radio stations, the Mail, everybody was coming and interviewing me. So I'd gone to the other side, and my success and my personal profile or success was comparable with the profile and success that my friends like Vic and Bob, for instance, they were becoming famous around then. So yeah, but I would just be sitting drinking with those people. It was good, and then people wanted, there'd be like people wanted to hang out with us. They wanted to come to our parties. So it never felt like, what the fuck am I doing here? When I was in Hollywood, hanging out with Helen Mirren, I felt where I should. That's like where I always thought I should be.
Really? It
That's
doesn't
what.
happen for people. It doesn't really happen for people here, though. Really, does it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, but when I was a little kid, I was quite good at football, so I played with older kids. Now older kids are bigger than me, so I had to be mouthy to sort of hold my own. I didn't care what I said to anybody, and that got me into trouble sometimes with the tougher kids at school. But they tended to be my mates. The two hardest kids in my year were my mates. But so I was already always, when I was like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, I was already hanging around with people who had bigger status in our community. Like guys who played for Leeds would come and play with us at the weekend. The kids who were joined they played for, it was called Leeds City Boys.
Mm.
They were I had 2 or 3 mates who were playing at that level. So sort of I tell you, these are the times, I'm writing this in the next book. These are the times I've been in awe. I met Gary Lineker in the entrance to a restaurant, and I was with a woman who knew his wife, and she introduced us. And I said, Gary, do you mind if I just say hello? Because I can just remember 1986 and him scoring a hat trick for England. And that was a little bit there. I was a little bit in awe of that. And then when I met David Essex, which sounds weird.
Really?
I mean, I've worked with Madonna for a few days trying to find her a writer for a film. I've spent a whole day in her house with her, just me and her in a room together. I knocked around with people like Bob Geldof doing a project with his daughter and stuff. And I've been on tour with U2 and all sorts of different people like that. But I was in Talk Sport when I used to be a sidekick on Johnny Vaughan's show. We used to have a show called Warm Up. I got in there early one Saturday morning, and there was a guy, and I sort of recognised him, and he went in the studio. I said to one of the researchers there, I said, who's that? He said, oh, it's a singer called David Essex. I'm like, when I was 7, 8, 9, I used to really like Mark Bolan and David Essex. I liked their songs, but they had curly hair like mine. David Essex, he came back out and he had short grey hair. We had a great little piece with him in Loaded. It was only half a page, and he was talking about how he'd been an apprentice at West Ham. It was a picture of him at West Ham in a changing room, and even then he looked cool. I felt a bit in awe. I went up to him and I said, "Can I just get a picture? Can I was a fan as a kid, and he was great. He was really friendly, and they're the only times I can remember being in awe of
What about
people.
with like Joe Strummer and that was not as much.
But with the musicians, I wanted to tell them what I thought.
All right, yeah.
Strummer told me that years later when I introduced him to some of my friends, and he turned to me quietly and he said, when I was down and out, you were the only one who wanted to interview me. And that's what I realised why, if he ever saw each other, he'd take time to come and say hello. And that was when he was just doing bit parts of acting and the Clash had gone, and he obviously felt down. He felt down about where he was. And I'd done him for the cover of Sounds. I put him on the cover of Sounds, which is, I tell that story in the book about how I manipulated that. And I didn't feel in awe of any. Here's a funny story. I was in the Hyatt Hotel on Sunset Boulevard. In the 70s, Led Zeppelin stayed there and they call it the Riot House. And I've come down and I've done a double take. Little Richard has just left. And I was like, fucking hell. And Derek, who I work with, the photographer, Derek Richards, he'd be a brilliant interview for you.
Really?
Yeah, he would be great for you. He's got great stories. I think he's got great stories. He's a great character. He has a lot of books of his work out now. Derek Richards. I went up. Derek's sitting at the bar in the where people have breakfast in the Hyatt. I said, that was little Richard. And Derek said, yeah, he lives here. He said, this gentleman's a friend of his. And I said, oh, hi. We had a chat. And then this gentleman left. I said, Derek. He said, what? He said, that guy. He goes, yeah, he's friends with Little Richard. I said, that's Bobby Womack. He was like a big soul singer. And for some reason, Derek hadn't clocked. So he was a friend of Little Richard's. So, like, when I went, I nearly didn't do Loaded because I was starting to hang out a lot in LA. I liked it there, and I was hanging out a lot with the Beastie Boys. And also, there was some other guys that I knew there who had kind of bands and stuff. And that would be exciting. I remember drawing up at some traffic lights, and Mickey Rourke was in his van next to us. And that was exciting, sort of seeing it. It was kind of weird that you go to this place and the world most famous actors and musicians would just be like hanging out. Oh, so that I don't remember really being in awe of any musicians. I tried to interview Jerry Lee Lewis once. I've never
What?
told anyone this because it didn't come to anything. He was playing in Harrogate, and there was a local band called Surfing Dave supporting them. That was when I was about 19, 18, and he just didn't show up. There was a few times when I tried to get hold of legends and they didn't show. There's a great guy called Alan Jones who's the editor of Melody Maker when I was on NME. He has good books out, and it's just him talking about all the legends he met in the 70s. Look them up.
Yeah,
They're,
definitely.
they're brilliant. It's a brilliant. I mean, they were the opposition. That would be like a Liverpool fan giving credit to a Man U manager or something, but or a Leeds fan praising a Man U player, something like that. But Alan Jones's books are great. I mean, he literally was on tour with the guy who took him under his wing was Lou Reed, who hated all journalists, but he seemed to like Alan.
Really, Jesus.
But that was the previous era because my era, I wasn't bothered about legends. Apart from, I guess, Strummer and Weller, but Weller wasn't doing much, and Terry Hall as well. I really like, obviously, the specials, but it was all about the new bands.
Yeah. Well, it was an exciting time, wasn't it? When you were
It was,
starting.
it was. That was another thing. I was very lucky about the time that I joined the
Yeah,
N. 87. There was but the American. What I said about getting into sort of like a broader type of music at the Wild Club in Manchester, and then coming to London and being able to go and see Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers, or Trouble Funk, or Mantronics, or whoever, it opened a lot of musicians' minds as well. That suddenly, the Beastie Boys and Run DMC and Public Enemy, they had a huge influence on this sort of indie bands, and then the way that music all mixed up and became Balearic and acid house, and those remixes that people like Paul Oakenfold and Martin Gore from Depeche Mode, and um, all those sort of guys, they were changing music, bringing dance beats into things like the Mondays.
yeah,
It was,
yeah.
it was an amazing time. It was a great time.
There's a bit in your book where I think, like what do you call it? Like a career advisor comes in and you say what? Did you say what to do? Like, if
Yeah, that's cool.
yeah, yeah,
But
and they said you need to pass music and English. Do you like? But did that piss you off? Like that you knew you had the ability, but they would
I
try to
just
put.
I rewrote that bit quite a bit, a few times. I had that because my dad was furious. Basically, as you went past Christmas in the fifth form, you'd have to go in and see the careers advisor and talk about what you might do in the summer when your O levels came back, or your CSEs, or whatever you were doing. And they were supposed to give you advice, and your parent went with you. So I sat down with this external careers advisor and a French or an English teacher she was, whose job was also to advise careers inside. And I said, I want to work for the music papers, because by then I was reading Smash Hits and NME or Sounds, sometimes Melody Maker, but mainly NME or Sounds. And she said, oh, well, you'll have to get an English degree and you'll have to do music. And then the careers guy from the council or someone said, or the education department, he said, have you thought about printing? But we came out of there, my dad was furious. He felt that like they were undercutting the ambitions of anybody that went in there, not just me.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know what's weird? There's a guy called Mark Hodgkinson who He wrote a book called, I've got it over there, No one round here reads Tolstoy. And it's his story about how he became a local journalist. And and how he loves books and how it got him out of just like a factory job or something. I can't see it on the shelf, but that's good. That means somebody's fucking nicked it because they liked it so much. But anyway, he's called Mark Hodgkinson. He might be good for you to interview. And Mark writes books, and he had a little publishing company. And it's basically his love affair. Like mine was music and football. His was books. And in that book, he describes the exact same scene. And he said, I want to be a journalist. And they'd say to him, do you want to be a printer? You got to realise that was the expectation. But I wasn't having it. I knew the world wasn't fair and that nobody has ever given me a fucking leg up. People have opened doors for me, like I guess Tony opening the door for me at Sounds, or Mr. Newhouse giving me that job at GQ. You know, it paid me a lot of money, which then allowed me to start my own company. But there was nobody, not like that twat Farage who got his first job because his dad knew somebody at the golf club and he got him a job in the city. There was none of that going on. And I think that actually, but I wasn't having it. I'd read the lyrics of the Specials and the Jam and the Clash. And now some people might look at that and think it's naive and laugh. But when you're like 13 years old and you hear a song called A Town Called Malice, or That's Entertainment, or Going Underground, or Career Opportunities by the Clash, or, Do Nothing, or Too Much Too Young by the Specials.
5 o'clock era.
Yeah, those songs were clearly saying, do not accept what you're being offered.
Mm.
There's more out there. And then smaller bands like the Redskins, who were a great band that I liked. I was listening to them a lot last week, thinking about how they made me feel. I don't have a degree. I have a fucking great era of records and songs in my head. 1979 was a brilliant year. I was 13 and I turned 14 by the end of the year. The list of records, I had a list of that I meant to put in Animal House of all the great records that came out that year.
Yeah.
And that would be the year I probably started earning money doing paper rounds and milk rounds.
Like with the fanzine, obviously, when you mentioned you'd go all over the country, try to sell it and stuff. How much of that was natural, like a natural gift to you, like because you had to do it yourself, didn't you? Like what you were saying and how you were selling it and stuff. Was that?
I was really hungry. And by that, I don't mean ambitious. I was fucking starving. I lived off bread and crisps. And I didn't eat things I hadn't eaten. Nowadays, I know that I only really talked this through with somebody about 5-6 years ago. I had an eating disorder. And when I described to her what my diet and my food was like as a kid, she said, you had anorexia. That's what it was. And it wasn't until I was about 15 that I could take a corner or tackle anyone because my legs were so skinny. So when I got to 17, they put me in central midfield because I suddenly was a little tiny bit stronger. They could put me in where I could tackle at school. But I was fucking really hungry. So I was hungry for some action. I was hungry for some crisps. And I was hungry for something to do in life. And there didn't seem to be a lot of people. I went to the Dole office every fortnight to sign on. And I'd go to these drop-in centres that were for unemployed people. There was nothing to do. There'd be a table tennis table with one bat. There'd be some fucking second-hand furniture stuffed about. There'd be a broken record player. I didn't want that. I wanted to be in the Chateau Marmont with a fucking world-famous actress. I mean, I couldn't identify that then. That's what I wanted. But I wanted the opportunity to have a great time. I've walked down Venice Beach in the sun, and I can tell you, it feels better than a fucking canal in Kirkstall. You know,
No,
it does. I mean, just Coastal Canal, Leeds Liverpool Canal looks great on a misty morning with a barge. I saw a nice photo of it yesterday. I just wanted more than £28 a fortnight or a month or whatever it was that was on. I wanted more than the same old fucking streets and the same old. I wanted to go places where it was exciting. I still do. I still feel like that. I've started planning some stuff for me. I'm going to just sign up and do a load of stuff. I've been watching that thing, Race Across the World. I love it.
Oh, yeah, watch this makes me good, though, innit? Yeah.
We're watching, me and my girlfriend watched series 1 and now we're watching series 2. I met a guy at a party. Sam Delaney had a book party and I met this guy there. There's a radio DJ called Ellis James. He's Welsh and
Yeah.
he's into football. And he introduced me to his mate, Mark. And he said, oh, if you like the Traitors, this thing I do, you'll like it. I was like, oh, whatever. I don't really like many of those programs. Never seen that Dancing or Ice or anything like that. And sat, not bothered about that. Can't give a fuck if an MP can dance. And so I watched it. It's really inspiring. But the danger is you become complacent and you spend your whole life looking at screens. When you've got to get out there, you've got to feel the force of the paddle through the water. Or you've got to stand on that train station and think, where the fuck am I going to stay tonight? I've slept on beaches in Rimini. I've slept on steps in Venice. I've slept, even when I was at GQ, I remember when I got sober, I was tired. I was really tired out. At that point, I didn't understand that I ate certain things. It just wiped me out. I can remember going home, not pissed, sober, and being so utterly fucked that I lay down in a doorway in my Savile Row suit in Covent Garden and just went to sleep for 20 minutes. It's fucking bonkers. This is what my next book is going to be about. Unless I might write a book about somebody else. I might write a biography of somebody. But if not, I'm going to write a book about going places and doing things. Because Animal House is about my career and my life. But there are so many more stories of amazing places that I've been to. And then, just people that I've met. I remember people I've met all the time. And I tell people that and they go, why didn't you put that in your book? I said, there's loads more. I was just lucky. Early on, somebody said to me, go and talk to people you're not supposed to talk to. That was great. There was lots of things I took out. Like Lemmy. I met Lemmy a few times. He was always inspiring. He was a great bloke. He'd stop and talk to you and buy you a drink. He was good company or just all sorts of people. I didn't really write long enough about some of the people that I've met and spent time with in the book. One reviewer said that. They said you get fleeting glimpses of stories you wanted more of. But the key is, I don't want that to stop. And what I've realized is, many of those adventures, most of those great adventures and moments and stories I had, they kind of evolved around the work I was doing. And so now I've just thought, well, you've got to just go and do them.
It would be a good book to read, that second one you're talking about there.
The big challenge is writing it. I've had my first discussion and pitch about it, but my problem is I can't write.
Why have you got to be in the zone?
Because I don't just get distracted. But this is why, you ask that retrospective question of, do you think things are different now? Things are great now. There's loads of bands. I'm not really into this massive retrospective thing. When everyone was going bonkers about Oasis, somebody said to me, I had 4 tickets for the last time they played Wembley. Nobody wanted them. There was a Oasis fatigue when they'd kind of like running their course and they weren't getting on near the end and they obviously weren't enjoying it. But I mean, I'll probably go to New York or Chicago or somewhere and see them in a different place with some Yanks. I've had people from America going, can you get tickets? I said, probably. If I come out to you, I could probably get some tickets, yeah.
Really?
I know a generation of guys who are working again. Merchandisers, graphic designers. Oasis is an economy.
Yeah, it is good for like Britain and the world really that they're back together in it.
But they were never as big as they are.
Yeah.
They've played like Madison Square Garden or somewhere huge like that. They've never played venues that big in America. That's a tip. Go away and don't come back until everybody wants you more and more and more. But a lot of it was Liam. on social media, I think. Liam is brilliant on Twitter.
He's
And he,
smarter than he gets credit for.
well, at the same time as Noel was retreating to just writing songs, Liam was like, all right. You know, he was just chatting to anybody. He was brilliant at social media. And then that was very clever. What he did was after he finished BDI, this is I understand it, he went to LA and he got two songwriters and they said, can you write some songs like our kid wrote for Oasis, his first two albums? And they did. And then he was clever like that. I don't know. I think I've heard it's his wife. He's very smart, his wife.
Yeah, she's his manager, I think. Yeah.
Is that what it is? That's why I said, what's going on with Liam? And somebody said his missus is really, really together and has a sort of advised him really well. And I think that's what happened to Sean as well. Sean Ryder somebody told me his wife was being a really fantastic influence on what he should do, and that's good. The women have saved us.
Yeah, exactly.
I've got a great girlfriend. She's like, the women saved the world for men who would otherwise ruin themselves.
There's a bit here I never got to actually wanted to ask you about. You know, we've loaded. What was the Dice Man feature?
That was after I went.
Oh, was it? Yeah, because it said.
No, but weirdly, I actually ran the same piece by the same guy at the
Really?
same time. Yeah, Ben. He was sort of umming and ahhing about whether to come and work at GQ, and I think he'd written that for something else, and I said I'll buy that. And then I think when Tim heard that I was running it, he ran it. But basically, in the 70s, there was a book called The Dice Man by a guy called Luke Reinhardt. You want to try this for a day? You set yourself a question: should I go to work or should I not go to work? And if it's an odd number, it's go to work. If it's an even number, don't go to work. And then the next question is, shall I commit a crime or you set yourself challenges, and the nearest thing was that comedian. He wrote a book called The Yes Man.
I'm not sure.
I've temporarily forgotten his name. He made a decision to say yes to everything, and they ended up making a film about him with Jim Carrey, I think.
Oh yeah, I've heard. Yeah, yes, man. I haven't seen it, but I've heard of the film. Yeah, is that what that is?
Well, I mean, it's similar. You just give yourself a, but I don't know if the Dice Man really did all of that, or whether some of it was just written. So I don't know.
I saw someone saying like that's why we're asking because it said, "Should I take heroin?" and he'd thrown it and all that. Like, I'm thinking Jesus, but yeah, I didn't know how true it was.
I saw that author recently. That writer, I think he's a security guard now.
Really?
That's probably still doing the dice. He was a good writer. He was a contemporary of mine when I was a young music writer. He was a young music writer on. He's called Ben. He was a young music writer on Melody Maker. So that's how I got him on Loaded. He was just, I sort of quite liked his writing when I was on NME. He was called the Stud Brothers was their name.
What your favorite? I was gonna say your favorite thing was the crisp World Cup, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was great fun. The thing that Loaded didn't do well was we didn't give pieces space. So
Really?
that's 3 pages, and the crisp bags are about the size of a full stop. We just did that near the end of the issue. Alan Lewis who was my boss. I heard the lads raising their voice, so I came out of the office, and the art team went, Alan reckons kettle crisps are the best crisps. But when now you can buy kettle crisps in the newsagents, can't you, on the corner shop? But back then they were massive bag, they were huge. And you could only get them from somewhere like a really posh pub or a wine warehouse like Victoria Wines.
All right, yeah.
Or a luxury crisp. I was going, you got to be fucking joking, Alan. Obviously, everyone knows it's Walker's cheese and onion. Then someone goes, bollocks, it's like McCoy's crinkle crisp smoky steak or something. And I said, why don't we just try and find out? Let's have the Crisps World Cup. That was a great night. I went home that night speeding on the E numbers of the crisps. Because also what we didn't do was we didn't buy 2 of each bag. So by the time the finalists had got through, we did do it like the FA Cup. We started it with 64 bags of crisps and worked it down to 2. And obviously by the time one of the bags had gone through 6 rounds of the cup, there'd only be one crisp left. And we were like, the guys tested them, would be biting a bit of them. Isn't it amazing that, I mean, I wasn't getting paid much, but we were getting paid to test crisps
It's
and
crazy.
vodka and fucking biscuits and Paul Mags. And I think they did a cigarettes World Cup. I didn't smoke, but I think quite near the end, or maybe after I'd gone, they did a cigarettes World Cup. The boys all used to smoke a cigarette called Marlboro Lights. That was the order. Get
Like,
booze, Marlboro Lights.
it's crazy. Like it is just like another childhood, isn't it? Just
That's
living
exactly
like
what it was. Yeah, it's good, isn't it? It's good. It was fun.
it is some life you've lived as well, isn't it? Like reading it, like the experiences where you go all over the world and just for a feature and stuff and
It
do
was
this mad
amazing.
thing.
No, you mentioned David Baddiel. I was on a TV show with him about 8 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. It was with another comedian who I wrote his first ever review, Alan Davis. He was in that Jonathan Creek thing.
Yeah, yeah. You were on that show with him, weren't you? Like
Yeah,
when you
yeah.
sat around that table, yeah.
On that show, I told a story, and David turned to me on the show and he said, "You mean to say 5 of you went to the Grand Prix in South America and they gave you money, which you spent on drugs or something?" I went, "Yeah." He said, "They sent 5 of you." I said, "Every month. We could go anywhere we wanted all over the world." And I mean, they normally didn't give us money. We normally have our own money, but the Grand Prix business, there was so much money sloshing around in it. They gave me about 4 grand expenses. I can remember looking at Martin Deason and we knew exactly where we were going to be spending that. It
Crazy.
wasn't on Grand Prix merchandising.
It's like the thingy as well, like that program is good. I forgot what it's called, the Alan Davis one, but it is
It's
good.
called As Yet Untitled.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, yeah, it's a good program. That, but like dancing
That's
with,
still going.
is it still going now? Yeah.
Is it going? I
Oh,
don't
I
know.
don't know.
I knew the people who made it. They asked me to be on it.
Yeah, um, yeah, I knew you'd been on that, but even like dancing with Prince, and you've had like at his own party and stuff, like a lad from Leeds at a
That,
party.
that, that was before Loaded.
Yeah, it was at Happy Mondays.
Also, by the way, that's true. None of my stories in my book are exaggerated or made up.
It's mental, isn't it?
I I saw this woman. She was gorgeous. She was about 6'2". She must have been a model or something. She was really gorgeous, and I thought I'm going to just ask her to dance. There was nobody dancing at this show. It was after Prince had played, and I was there with the Mondays, and Lisa Stansfield was there. And Prince was up on the balcony in this balcony. It looked like a boat, and nobody was dancing. And I just saw this really fit woman, and I thought I'm going to just go and ask that woman. And again, I was dressed like this. I had some trainers and shorts and a t-shirt, probably a polo shirt because we'd all been to the Lacoste shop and bought loads of Lacoste shops, loads of Cost shirts. And I went and said, "Do you want to have a dance?" And she went, "Yeah." Let me go and check. And she had to go and ask a bloke
Who was
who
it? Do you know who it was?
he must have been a chaperone. She must have been somebody influential's girlfriend.
Yeah, yeah.
She went and asked this old guy, looked like somebody from The Sopranos, like an old, tough looking guy. And he looked over at me and he obviously very quickly registered I was no sexual threat to his boss's girlfriend. And he just nodded. I went onto the dance floor and I was dancing with this woman. She was gorgeous. So we were just having a dance. I think she wanted to have a dance as well, you know. And then within maybe 30 seconds, there was another couple dancing to us like at a wedding.
Mm.
We were a foursome dancing. There were no handbags. And I looked across and it was Prince. I couldn't believe it. There was the 4 of us dancing there. And then within 2 minutes, the dance floor filled up and he fucked off. He just wanted to dance with me and this woman. I'm joking there. He wanted to dance. He didn't at his party. He didn't want to be surrounded by people talking to him. And we danced the whole song, 4 of us.
It,
Years later, my mate put Prince on at a place in Kent called the Hop Farm. And I was leaving, and my girlfriend then, she was a massive Prince fan. I had to go home to take my son home to his mum's. She said, "Are you going?" And her mate, our mates were going, "You going? You're not going to see Prince?" I said, "I fucking danced with him privately in the night. I'm not bothered about watching him. I've got his records." And they went, and my girlfriend said, "You what? You danced with Prince?" I said, "I'll tell you when you get home."
Jesus.
But you don't. You know what? When you're young, if you go and do things, you don't think of it.
Well, were you gutted when you left Loaded? I know it was financial and stuff, but was you gutted because you'd started it, hadn't you?
Was I gutted when I left?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I was. I mean, I was crying when I was driving over the bridge to resign.
Really, yeah.
I think I'd resigned the day before, but I was driving over the bridge at Blackfriars to tell the guys I was going. I told the staff, I told the bosses I was leaving. I was sad, but I didn't really feel there was any opportunity because I was getting offered huge jobs with 3, 4 times the wages, and I wasn't really earning much money, and I was pretty fucked, you know. I was like, I was wrung out. I didn't really have an immediate support network around me within the company, and the company I went to did have that. They had people that kind of got me clean. I had a great secretary at GQ, and they had people that just gave me a bit more structure to be able to work in. And I suppose retrospectively, the ideal scenario would be one, they'd paid me decently. Two, they'd paid everyone decently. Three, maybe I'd have got a royalty for creating this idea, and four, I could have done with a month off. And it was just all so fast. It was so fast and so extreme and so stimulated. It was wearing me out. And suddenly I was wearing suits and having lunch at the Ivy every day. And it was a different world. It was the sort. Loaded was more fun, but GQ was better paid and more classy environment.
Mm.
And better guy to work for. The boss at GQ, I probably wouldn't have gone to GQ if it hadn't been that guy. You know, he was a massive fan of Loaded. He knew it inside out. That's why I went. I thought this guy loves Loaded. But
You mentioned there though you got clean. It fucked a lot of people up who were part of that Loaded thing, did it? The drugs and the drink and the like, just
yeah, but
24.
I mean, as I said, I mean, we did kind of revel in the excesses of drinking heavily and using drugs a bit, but it was really prevalent after ecstasy introduced a generation to drug taking, and after ecstasy, suddenly there was cocaine around. I think it was the Brinks bullion robbery paid for the first ecstasy to come in. So I think, I mean, people must have written books about drug use in Britain in the 90s, but there was suddenly a generation that were used to doing something other than just drinking. And you'd go into Orient Football Club or a restaurant in the West End of London, and there'd be a sign in the toilet saying drug use is drug drug use is forbidden. In a football club.
Crazy. So, what is like? I know obviously he's still clean today. What is life like for you these days?
Life's really, I feel really happy. I mean, the only thing I miss is I miss doing magazines. I miss the sort of swirl of activity that went on every day and every week and every issue. Um, and I miss the places that they take you to. You'd get a call and say, "Do you want to go here to do this?" And you'd be like, "Yeah, that sounds great." Even later, after all my magazines, occasionally I'd be doing work. I went kayaking. Martin Deason worked for me on Loaded and GQ. He rang me up and he goes, "You like canoeing, don't you?" I went, "Yeah, I've got a kayak." He said, "There's a trip to Canada and I've had to pull out." I went, "Okay, all right, I'll go on that. I'll fill in for you." I ended up writing that 8 times. I got paid 8 times to write that. It was such a good trip. And I met two guys, one of which I'm still is a really good friend on that trip. We had such a brilliant laugh. But I miss that. But life's fine. Life's nice. I don't, because I wrote the book and because there was a documentary, I've had a few years of a lot of people asking me about the past. But I don't, like I say, I've only got 2 magazine covers on the walls. I'm not stuck. Um,
Mm.
Yesterday I had this amazing fucking knife really, really expensive, vicious, violent-looking knife, which my gardener has got. It came from Japan. She said, "Get one of these. They're brilliant." So she ordered me this knife. I was lying on the floor digging these fucking grass weeds out of my shingle garden. That's what Sunday morning looked like. We're talking on Monday lunchtime. But Saturday night, I was under a big pile of blankets, and it was a bit like a festival vibe. I was on the shingle at Dungeness next to the power station, watching this great American film called Badlands outdoors with about 20 other people. That felt like a very. My feeling at doing that was, I want to write about this.
Really?
But there's no obvious place to ring and say, "Can I write a piece just saying this is great?" So I miss
Mm.
having my own domain to say, "I'm going to give this guy Chris 4 pages of exposure about how great his film, his outdoor film club is, Rebel Reel Cinema Cine Club." So that was like, that would be an example of something that I really like doing on Saturday night, and then just fucking around in the garden. I had to make sure I didn't accidentally kill myself with this knife. You should never have a knife between the thighs because you can cut you in a leg, you'll die. I know that because I slept in a wood on a thing with an ex-soldier survival course. Sometimes I do mad shit like this, but I just don't write about it. But mainly I'm reading and avoiding writing.
Yeah.
And cycling, I've started going cycling a bit. And I'm a dad.
Mm.
Yes, my son's 23, my eldest, and my youngest is 11. So I like spending time with them. Um, so, the 23-year-old, he's got a girlfriend and a job, so I don't see him as much as I used to do. And the 11-year-old's into fashion, and he loves playing football in the garden, and so that's the main thing. And maybe something else will come of Animal House. I'm waiting to see if that'll happen. Maybe there'll
What do you
be,
mean, another book kind of thing? Or
maybe there might be a screen version of it of somewhere. I don't know. Maybe that might happen.
have you ever been approached about doing like a biopic kind of thing?
Yeah, loads.
What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it'd be exciting. I'm not really gonna go into it, but maybe something will happen. You don't know. You don't know, do you?
No, no, yeah. It would
You
be
don't.
good to see. It would be.
Yeah, but I mean, that might still happen. I didn't expect. To be honest, I did not expect to be talking about Animal House. I don't know when it came out. 2 years ago, maybe three. I don't know when it came out, but I didn't think I'd still be doing interviews about it. But I like it when I still get people contact me on social media and say, "Can I buy your book? Will you sign it?" If anyone wants one, it's at James Brown on social.
Yeah, like I say, I've read it. It is a brilliant book. There's the stories you've said today in it, but like like you mentioned, there's a lot more other stories that could be coming out soon when you start to write it.
Did you read it quick?
Did I read it quick? Yeah, it's
Because
one of those books that you read through like
I had blokes
half of
writing.
the night.
I had blokes and women writing to me on Twitter going, "I love your book. I've read it in 2 days." I thought that took me 8 years to write. I deliberately, I took loads out.
Mm,
I deliberately made it fast and
yeah,
get that energy. And I probably took too much out. Like, there's loads of things I keep thinking, why didn't I leave that in, or why didn't I put that in? And it was hard writing it because of the stuff about my mum, but that took a long time to get down. And but yeah. Today's Monday. This was the downtime. We were talking at 3:21 on a Monday afternoon. That was downtime on the NME. The paper would be being printed. It would have been the last pages would be from the typesetters to the printers. I might go to the typesetters for say from 8 o'clock till 10 o'clock on a Monday morning and just check my pages, and then I'd be done. And you sort of had Monday off. You called people, you answered letters, you threw shit away. You didn't want news, press releases, and stuff. And then Tuesday morning, 10:30, the editorial meeting. The the week started again. So I always think of Monday as downtime. Fortunately, now I think of every day as downtime. No, life for me. You answer that question. Life for me is good. I've got a great girlfriend. I've got two great kids. I'm a little bit battered physically, but I'm in good nick, relatively. I can play football badly. And it's sunny. I like it. Life's good. Apart from the odd person I should have gone home with who I didn't, I don't have that many regrets. There's a couple of business things that I should probably have done that I didn't do. But because the thing is, everything's still out there.
Mm.
Everything is out there. If you can do anything. If you're a 59-year-old and you're a bit bored in your life, you can learn a new skill. You can learn a skill without even going anywhere. Just clock into YouTube and somebody will teach you how to become a carpenter or a sushi chef or how to learn to sail a boat or how to make shoes. You can fucking do anything you want. And I
Yeah.
think people have got to understand that life doesn't have to be what you're given, and nothing's too late to change.
No,
That's
I
what.
totally agree.
Do you know what I mean? You're doing it because you're young and ambitious. That's what I saw in you. I was going to ignore your requests because you were sending so many. And as I told you, I remembered being 19, trying to meet that guy who published The Face. And on the day I was supposed to meet him, he said he had to go to the dentist. And I thought, even though I've met him and got to know him since, I didn't want to be the guy that turned the young guy down that's giving it a go, because you have a great array of people and you're pushing and doing it.
Thank you for joining me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. We've
Been
done.
great. I've really enjoyed. I did a podcast on Friday about Vic and Bob.
Did you?
Yeah, which I enjoyed talking about that. What I realise is there's lots of things I've never really talked. I mean, I've talked about a lot of this, but you've asked some really good questions that I haven't asked. What you want as an interviewer, as an interviewee, you want people to ask questions that make you think that you haven't been asked before.
Yeah. Well, I hope I have done that for you. Yeah.
Make that your goal when you ask a load of questions. Try and ask somebody a question that they've never been asked.
Yeah. Thank you for that advice. Yeah. You used to do interviews as well. Did you enjoy doing that back in the day?
And I was rubbish at it.
Really?
I used to talk over people. And that was quite negative because I never planned. At Loaded, there was a writer called John Wilde, and he told me that he planned everything. And my interviewing changed after I saw how good his interviews were. That I actually started planning what I would ask.
Yeah.
And, but I went to interview Ronnie Wood from the Rolling Stones in Miami for my magazine, Jack. And I had John's brief in mind, ask him things he's never been asked before. And the press officer sent me a suitcase full of magazines of things like Uncut and Mojo and Q. And they're all, I kept reading them, I'm thinking, Jesus Christ. I didn't take any of them. I thought, I've got to ask. So I got him to talk about his childhood and his family, and because his family were all musicians. And I got him to talk about his childhood. I also asked him how many pairs of pants he got through on the tour. And afterwards, Brendan worked with me on Jack. He'd been on the NME as well. He's a massive Rolling Stones fan. He came up to me and he said, there's loads of stuff that I've never heard him talk about before. And that was it. That made me happy. You know, when you said earlier, when did I ever think, was there a moment when I thought, oh, I've made it? That was, even though that was just private, Brendan saying there's loads of stuff that I've never read. That's the aim as an interviewer.
It's nice to hear the different stories as well, isn't it, that you've not heard before?
Well, I tell you who's the great at it is Michael Caine. He makes you think you're getting stuff out of him he's never told anybody. He go, that remind me, and he'll tell you a story. And then you walk away on air, bouncing along thinking, I've got a fucking quote that no one's ever given before. And then you'll find it on YouTube and he's maybe telling it to Parkinson or somebody like that, or Jonathan Ross.
But
So
yeah, honestly, thank you for your time.
that's the answer to your question. When I felt
Wait.
like I made it was when I met Michael Caine. That's
Yeah,
that's yeah.
you've met a lot of great people as well, haven't you? What even
That was it though, meeting Michael Caine.
that's the peak, yeah, when you knew you'd made it.
Yeah. And him being nice about Loaded. That was the moment when I thought, that's fucking great. I've got that picture up at home of me and him, the Polaroid that he signed. Great talking to you. Get back behind the curtain. Watch this now.
Yeah.
That's it, I've gone.
Right, no, honestly, nice one for that.
See you later, Ethan. Stay in touch, mate.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, see you.
It was a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Stay in touch.